Welcome everyone to our fourth in the series of Spirituality in the Arts. Today we have Mary Gahbauer with us, Dr. Mary Gahbauer, who coins herself as a doctor who docents. So Dick, would you share a little bit more?
Mary and Reinhard Gahbauer have been very faithful communicators at Trinity Church for a number of years, and Mary serves at the altar, and both at the altar and preparing the altar in the altar guild at the 8 o'clock liturgy very regularly, and from time to time they're 10:30 as well. Mary served on the vestry in the past, and she's now on the vestry. But I have to say, Mary, I was actually reading a little bit from Romantic poet John Keats earlier today, who was a medical doctor and an artist. Sounds familiar. And unfortunately, he lived a very short life, and we're happy that your life has been much longer and richer through that lifespan. But we ask that we think about Keats's sort of most famous line at the end of Ode on a Grecian Urn. He says, "Beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know." Sometimes people have thought that was a little too glib, but I think there's a richness and a not only a memorable quality to that, but a kind of foundational quality about the relationship of beauty and goodness, that is to say, the moral life and truth. And Mary, your teaching has always, for me, always touched on all three of those aspects. So we really look forward to hearing what you have to say about some wonderful art pieces that lead us into beauty, truth, and goodness.
Okay. All right. Here we will start these up, Mary, and our doctor who docents is on.
So everyone can see this slide now?
I believe so.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was asked to make a presentation on this verse from the book of Revelation, and I started wondering what it meant. And I thought about new life forms, about God breathing into clay Adam, new life of humans, how they come seemingly from out of nowhere and become completely unique individuals. The new life of Christ in his resurrection, new life in Christ by baptism, new life in healing, in being made whole, and the new life of seasons. And since we're kind of getting an opportunity to see spring quite a lot, I thought that I would go with the last topic in order to have a more coherent presentation. The next image, please. So this is a fresco from the 17th century BCE, which means that it is in fact Bronze Age. And this was discovered only 50 years ago because it had been buried under a volcanic eruption. It's in a villa on the island of Santorini, which is in the Aegean Sea. It's one of the Greek islands. The name spring is in inverted commas because no one knows what they called it, but those who excavated it about 50 years ago decided to call this room the spring room. Fresco means fresh, and it is the art of painting onto wet plaster. And as you can see, it makes very vivid and enduring images. I don't know what their pigments were, but they are similar to those that were used in Crete. I think the reason for calling it spring is because it depicts lilies and also swallows. If I told you that this were painted in the 1920s, I'm sure you'd swallow it. It is in fact a rather timeless kind of presentation. It's both abstract and stylized. The astonishing thing that it has lasted so long, and that was because it was buried by volcanic ash. There was an enormous eruption in the 17th century BCE, and the fresco was buried until quite recently. Here's another fresco, a Roman one this time, similarly buried by the eruption of Vesuvius in Pompeii, near Pompeii in the 1st century. Pompeii had a different fate. As soon as the dust had settled, looters broke in, and people actually tunneled through the buildings that had been coated in ash and lava in order to build waterways and so forth. Just had a helpful message that my internet connection is unstable, sorry. Pompeii has been picked at and picked over on and off since the eruption actually happened. And so the historic value has declined and the aesthetic value has declined, but this is still a most beautiful image. This shows Flora, the Roman goddess of spring. She is so delicately shown. The turn of her head on her neck is just exquisite. And the grace of her figure, the green is spring green, and the complementary color of orange or bronze sets it off. She's supposed to be plucking flowers, but to my mind, she ought to be distributing flowers from her cornucopia if she's bringing. The gesture of her right hand certainly is a delicate pluck, I think. This is a hanging scroll which was made of silk and drawn in pen, in ink. This man, Guoji is my best effort, was a master, and he considered this his masterpiece. I'll let you read what he has to say about it. The image is hard for us to interpret because we're not used to this kind of presentation of art, of pen drawings. He says that this picture is a metaphor of experiences of upcoming spring, vague languor with foretaste of impending joy. Next, please. Stacey?
Is this the correct one, Claude Monet?
Yes, I'm just network back on. Yeah, Orchard in Spring by Claude Monet.
Okay.
We find this a great deal easier to look at because we're so used to impressionist images. They love spring, love the impressions. So it is considered to be the master of impressionist images of spring. It's actually near his famous house at Giverny, and the person depicted is supposed to be his mistress's daughter. I don't think it was his daughter. And this was called Violettomania, which I think is a reference to Verdi's opera La Traviata, where the heroine, Violetta, writer had had amorous relationships with quite a few different men. As with all Impressionists, they want to give an atmosphere. Sometimes the colors they use are not quite as they appear in nature, but the depiction is not supposed to be real. It's supposed to be giving off an image. And the next one,
And Mary, if you can just talk a little more into your speaker, we're catching most of your words, but it's coming in and out.
I think that's because my internet is unstable.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that. So this is a contemporary effort at painting spring, and someone who was looking at this liked it a lot, which I have to say I am not particularly drawn to it, but she said she liked it because it was a surprise that suddenly here's a burst of color, and perhaps that's the meaning. So these last images have been about how people have been attempting to express their feelings or express events of spring. Now, with the next slide, we go on to a completely different meaning of spring. This is the decline of the Roman Empire. By 451, the Roman Empire, which was held together by military might, found itself fighting on too many fronts. And here are the Huns. Huns were otherwise known as barbarians. They were farmers. And they're supposed to be fighting against the Roman army. This, I think, is a charming image. Again, we've got the green and the orange. But it has to be taken as figurative and not representative. For one thing, 451 is the Dark Ages, and we don't have any representations of what went on then. For another, the style of armor is much more in the medieval style. Another thing is that a handful of people are pointing lances at another handful of people, and all the horses are doing a kind of synchronized spring, which is not the normal gait of a horse. So this is really what happens when people deal with historic subjects. They interpret them to wear the clothing and accoutrements of their own day and not how things might have been. But the significance is that with warmer weather, the fighting broke out again. Armies were usually decamped for winter, went back to rest and so forth, get out of the mud and the cold. And then when the warmer weather came, battles started up again. And this went on for a long time, even through Henry VIII's age. The next shows the Battle of Poitiers, which was between the English and the French. And again, the manuscript is dealing historically. This looks like a medieval image. The outlines are flat. The postures are kind of all the same and not varied. Stereotyped postures, and the helmets are very strange. There doesn't seem to be room for a head in there, let alone a neck. And overall, they look like sheep. The fleur-de-lis and on this man's costume and the crown on his head indicate that that is, in fact, the King of France. Another meaning of spring with this Bruegel is it's the start of the agricultural work with digging and planting. This is a characteristic Bruegel painting. They have interesting views full of detail and information on how the people lived. Here is some kind of roof work going on. Here is the celebrations going on. And here, a flock of sheep. Here are the Doughty burghers this is Flemish, doing their spring planting. Bruegel images usually have a lot of people working hard. The East Bergholt Common is a John Constable and is very typical of his work. He painted landscapes, and because he lived in East Anglia, which is the bulge of England that goes out towards Europe, is flat, he always had very big skies. And you can see that spring doesn't necessarily bring great warmth and blossoming in a northern island. The horses, or oxen, or whatever, I think they're oxen, pulling a farrow. And you see the windmill in the background. This is because East Anglia is rather a wet fenland, and they sought the help of the Dutch, who are only a few miles away across the sea, to come and help drain the land and make it agriculturally useful. Completely different. This is an American artist in the last century, and he has a completely different treatment of his topic. We're not treated to much light here, and at face value, you're tempted to think that it is in fact simplistic, because the trees and the grass and the mountains and the clouds all have blue lines around them. But it is in fact the blue lines which give the painting its movement, its energy. You could say that it is almost moving. You can almost feel the clouds moving and creating shadows over the land. So even though the colors are not particularly spring-like, it does give off an excitement of new growth. And this is an apple orchard. Apple orchards take a great deal of agricultural work too. This man painted so many agricultural themes that he was known as Thoreau of the Adirondacks. And here is the next one, Spring Planting in Greenwich Village, is actually at CMA, and it's a very beloved painting. You can see why. It gives an atmosphere not so much of hard agricultural work as of a kind of community project. The ladies get together. Only one of them is actually doing anything, and the rest of them are just kind of hanging out, holding their rakes and chatting. One noteworthy thing about this is that had everything on the back fence been painted light, it would not have given such an impression of light as it does with the two dark heads in contrast against it. Now here's Spring with Machine Age Noise number 1. He did a series. This has a strange effect because of the repetition of the unit. At the bottom, you can see some things that look like the tines on a harrow, and there are what look like mechanical belts going across. I think the idea of this painting is that machines make noise, and the repetition and the blurriness of the image almost makes this painting seem to hum or buzz. And another meaning of spring. These people are out of work. This is in New York. The painter, I was wondering about his name. I thought, how is it to go through life called Evergood? Well, it turns out he didn't. His father was Australian of Polish Jewish extraction, and he had a very different name. But his father must have done well, because the boy went to Eton and then Oxford and thought he needed a more anglicized name and chose this for himself. He painted in this deliberately cartoonish kind of way. He was known as a moralist. He stuck to figurative paintings when everyone else in the art scene was going abstract at this time. And he felt, along with others such as Jack Levy, that art should be used as social commentary. He called this picture spring, and it's very hard to see what's spring-like about it, with these people looking dejected, without energy, without light, without cheerfulness. And the answer is in the lower left corner, where there's a tiny little snowdrop. Now, these next few paintings are about the interpretation of springtime as light, or an attempt to put down the feeling of spring in patches of color. Here is one from the 19th century. The next one is a few years later. Emil Schuffernecker has certainly brought out the idea of blazing blue sky and cheerful light. But this one from the 20th century is an unusual interpretation. The artist has used spring-like colors with green and pink and yellow, but he's arranged them in a kind of plaid. I don't really understand how this helps the interpretation of spring, almost as though he seems to want to contain it and compartmentalize it with all those boxes and cross-hatchings. But I included it because it was a completely different version of spring from the impressionist light kind of thing. Georgia O'Keeffe is well known for her desert paintings. She's also well known for her close-up paintings of various things, skulls, flowers. Again, she has made the lightness of the light stand out by putting in dark touches here and there. These next, in fact the last few slides, are to do with the idea of springtime as the only pretty ring time, and young men's thoughts turning to dalliance and so forth. Now this plant is wonderfully rendered in delicate colors, but the focus of it is the generative organs of the plant, the way in which the female parts of the plant are going to become fertilized and going to eventually come up with new plants.
Mary, I just want to make sure we're on the right slide. Are we on La Primavera by Romare and Botticelli?
No, I was just talking about Georgia O'Keeffe.
Oh, okay. I got ahead of ourselves.
Oh.
Sorry about that.
Did you get a chance to look at this one?
Yes, we were on Georgia O'Keeffe, and I had just flipped ahead to the Botticelli slides, but we're back.
Did you hear what I said about it's got all its generative parts on view?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Well, we'll go ahead then to the Primavera.
Okay.
So Ramara Bearden, this also is held at CMA, this image, is an African-American artist and was fascinated by Renaissance Italian paintings, including, and you've got a snip of it on the right, Botticelli's La Primavera. So that is the right-hand end of the whole kind of frieze of Botticelli Primavera, which incidentally is supposed to be one of the most famous paintings in the world, but I doubt it can outpace Mona Lisa. Now, what is going on in this, in both, I think, renderings, is that Zephyr, the west wind, rapes Chloris. And so here you can see him grabbing hold of her before turning her into Flora, the Roman goddess of spring. And he thought that this showed that good could come out of an evil act. He painted his version in 1967, and I looked up the events in American politics and American social goings on in 1967. And certainly there was a lot of evil with race riots and war protests and so on going on. He himself worked as a social worker and he was interested in social healing. And so the meaning of this one is, again, that good can come out of evil. Now we're on the last slide. This is very recognizably Marc Chagall, a Russian Jew, who paints these very evocative, dreamy, romantic paintings. And his style, if you want to pin him down to an ism, he is a blend of cubism, fauvism, symbolism, and supernatural. His paintings often refer to marriage, although they often contain these strange creatures who are not entirely human. Sometimes he uses birds. But here is something that's undeniably spring-like. He has his violin, although how he's going to play it with a hoof on his left hand, I don't know. And he has a young lady sitting on his left shoulder. Someone referred to her the other day as his muse. I didn't really see her so much as his muse, as some kind of idea that he wanted to move towards, and that possibly is the same thing as a muse. So you can see her red skirt and her green jumper, and her she's holding a posy. So despite the strange creatures that he inserts into his images, they turn out joyful. He has another one. This is called Le Printemps. He spoke French. And he also has another one called Spring Day or something like that, which shows a girl. It does not have a blue background. You only see kind of 2/3 of her. She's not doing very much, and it just doesn't look quite so Chagall and quite so dreamlike and pleasant. So that's my last image. I'd be glad to go back to any and look at them further if anyone would like, or hear comments and questions.
Yes, if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and we can flip to that specific slide.
Mine is a general statement, and that is that, Mary, as you presented, it recalled two things that I neglected to say in the introduction, but I think it's better here. It makes sense that you'd be thinking about springtime because you and Reinhard are in a new springtime of delight with the birth of your most recent addition to the family, Max, and in Washington State. So congratulations to you two grandparents, and also to your son and son John and your daughter-in-law for a very new, happy springtime for you all. The other thing is, I neglected to say that Mary, while trained as a physician in Britain and serving in South Africa and in the UK, has been on the faculty of Otterbein University for many, many years and won the teaching award several times, and I think we can see why. So thank you very much, Mary, for what you've offered. Others should ask specific questions. That's just an addendum to my introduction.
Well, I might ask a question, and that is, which of these images stands out as a favorite for anyone?
Catherine and I will jump in again because I'm really speaking for Catherine's mother, Dolly, who was trained as an art history student and loved Botticelli and also loved Bruegel. So I think she would say amen, amen on those two slides for sure.
And Mary, I'm curious, which one is your favorite?
Oh, I love the Chagall. I love this one, which might be something to do with the fact that it was given to me on my birthday when I was 18 by a young man. And then also I love the version of Flora, the second slide, the fresco of Flora, the goddess of spring.
Carol and I have always been devotees of Impressionism, but we've seen some other things in here that are really, yeah, the Roman goddess of Flora, but also that Santorini scene, the vibrant colors that have managed to survive all these years.
Mm-hmm.
The gift of seeing these with an expert, a docent, Mary, this one, the fresco of Flora, jumped out to me in a different way, just talking about the angle of her neck, kind of the color of her frock, and even the activity that she had with the flowers. So I found myself kind of glossing over some of that, but I really appreciate you drawing our eyes to the specificity, to the specific details of this one.
Mm.
Okay. Are there other questions or comments? Okay.
I think
Mary,
it was a very,
Okay.
I think it was a very diverse selection of interpretations of spring, and I enjoyed that diversity.
Mhm. I agree. Mary has done tours for Trinity Church after church, and hopefully when the art museums open and we are back to gathering in groups, you'd be willing to do one of these in person for us again. So thank you, Mary, and thank you to all who joined. This recording will be posted on our website at trinitycolumbus.org. And next week we have Jacob Reed, who's going to be doing a piece on poetry, sanctuary and poetry, and Sarah Hickson, his wife, will also be joining. So hope to see many of you next week at 11:30. Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's
Okay.